Hey everyone, and welcome to what I'm calling the Burnout Clinic, Workplace Burnout Clinic. I got a question from Alex and I thought it was so important, I couldn't ignore it and I wanted to do it justice. So I've actually got notes here to answer it. But the question is, overall, what do you do when the people have left your team and they haven't been replaced? So it's meaning that all the workload is dependent on fewer people and you're staying. Long story short. So what I wanted to do is give a little context to this problem, because it's not just you that is experiencing this, but also look at it from three angles: one from the company, one from the manager, and one from the employee. So the first place to start is the actual context. So I wanted to give some stats on this because it really is an issue, especially in the UK. 56% of UK employees say their company is short-staffed. 56% right now. 72% have taken on additional responsibilities because of staffing shortages. So there aren't enough people to do the work, but the people who are actually there get stretched to be able to fill that demand. And then you also have more than half of UK workers report burnout. More than half. With excessive workload being the leading cause. So they're getting just too much work to do within the time scale. And this reminds me of a story with my first major employment in architecture. I was there up until about 9-10 o'clock at night. One of the senior managers came back to pick up something and he asked me, "What are you still doing here?" And I said, "Oh, we got deadlines and stuff and I really need to work." And he said, "Okay, one of three things are happening here. Number one, you're lazy," which I don't think you are because I've seen your work pace so far. Two is they're giving you too much work for anybody to be able to do within this time because you're employed between 9 and 5 o'clock. Or three, you haven't been trained enough to be able to do it fast enough to be able to fit within that time scale. And it really got me thinking about the different aspects that are involved when it comes to someone feeling overstretched at work. The last data I just wanted to share is that nearly 2/3 of UK workers worry about burnout due to resource cuts. So you're in the company, you're aware that something is changing, you can see it's going to impact you, and you worry as a result, rightly so. How is this going to affect my team? How is it going to affect me? How is it going to affect our workload? I'm already stretched. So what will happen if this person who's the key person in the team leaves? Am I going to be ready to be able to fill in that gap if they don't replace them in time? So that is one thing to consider. The question, to give backdrop again, is to look at how we get there, right? So if you imagine one person leaves, is often seen as, okay, it's that individual person's issue. If two people leaves, it might be a bit of a coincidence. But if three or more people leave from the single team, as a company, you have to start stepping back and saying, what is the challenge with the environment that's causing this? Because it's obviously not an individual person's issue. So the first step is that several people resign. And really, there's a step before that, which will either be something like stress. Are they being similar to what my situation was? Are they unqualified for the role? Are they being given too much work for anybody to be able to do within the time scale? Or are they not being trained enough, which might be an onboarding issue, it might be a professional development issue, it might be a training issue. Or it might be a situation where there are better opportunities elsewhere. Are you offering enough? Is your salary enough? Are the benefits and packages and support enough? Do they feel seen or heard? All those kind of things on a well-being issue as well. So then we get to the first stage, which is that several people resign. The second stage is that they're either going to be hiring freezes or slow recruitment. So hire freeze can happen if the company is sitting there thinking, okay, we don't have the budget to bring in anyone new. Even with the stopping of the payment of the people who left, they might be sitting there thinking, okay, we need to understand what the problem is before we try and fix it, because we might be bringing other people into a situation that's failing. So they need time. And in that time, they might be freezing the budgets to be able to understand what is happening. Two is that they're freezing the budgets because they want to see if what they do have, as in the employees, you are able to handle it. And if they are, then it might be a situation where instead of bringing new people, they might be able to support you more. That's the best case scenario for that. Or there might be slow recruitment. They have a situation where they've lost a lot of employees. And now the question is, are we hiring the best ones for the team? Are they right for our culture? Are they rightly qualified in the first place? Maybe we need to look at our hiring process so that once they enter the company, they are able to stay. Then the third stage is usually that the work doesn't decrease, right? The clients still have their demands. You're still searching out for more and more work because as a company works, it's based on supply and demand. You, as a company, are providing the supply. Is there demand for it? And if there is demand, then the idea is for most companies within this capitalist world, we're looking to grow. We're looking to grow so we can help more people and do the things that the business is designed to do. So the idea is to, you know, if you have the clients, you're not going to let them go. You want to try and figure out how to meet their demands because you've signed contracts, you've got expectations, you've got relationships with these clients, but then the pressure is on the people who are delivering for them. The fourth stage is that the remaining employees absorb those responsibilities. So in the meantime, there's an interim stage where there is more demand than there is supply. And so the people who are in the workplace have to stretch. They have to do more. They find themselves working much later, or they're not able to take breaks and they're starting to work through their lunch breaks. And at this point, there is a moment where they are absorbing these responsibilities. And I'm going to get to this later, but I think part of what companies miss the trick on is not acknowledging that. They just expect people to survive, expect people to work more, and not acknowledge that they're having to do so. And then you get the last stage, which is that temporary overload becomes permanent. It becomes the new norm. So then it becomes an expectation for people coming in to meet this demand, to meet this level of supply. And so it becomes a toxic environment, which might be even worse than the ones that the people left in. So those are the 5 stages. Several people resign, hiring freezes or slow recruitment, work doesn't decrease, the remaining employee absorb the responsibilities, and then you have a temporary overload, which becomes the new normal. Now, there is actually a term for this, which researchers coined. It's called the job demand resource imbalance. So you've got the job demand, which is from the client side. They've got work that you need to be doing as a company. And then you've got the resource, which is you, the employees who are delivering the work. And there's an imbalance. It's not equal. Now, best case scenario is you have a relatively equal balance. If you have too much demand and not enough resource, it means the resources are overstretched. If you have too much resource and not enough demand, it means the company shrinks. So you kind of want to have a relative balance here. But ultimately, when the demand increases and the resource doesn't, burnout is an inevitability. In time, it will happen. So what do you do about this? And like I mentioned before, I wanted to approach this from 3 angles because I think it's very easy as an employee not to understand the business factors that are at play here. So you can feel like you're being wronged. And sometimes you are, let's just be real. Sometimes you are, but without understanding how the business is functioning, you may not have the empathy for the individual humans who are in charge of the decisions that will influence your experience. So I'm going to answer this from 3 angles. The first being the company, second being the manager, and the third being the employee. So let's look at it from the company perspective. Ultimately, it's not a well-being issue at this point. And often if I'm speaking to a company and I'm saying, I'm doing an offer and saying, we can help you, we've noticed this turnover issue, etc., it's often being met with a well-being approach. And what we're offering is not a gong bath or a gym membership, for example. It's a solution to a problem. And the problem is not a well-being issue, it's a structural risk issue. If you don't solve this balance issue, the company can falter. And you will be letting down your clients. You will be letting down your teams and your individual managers, and people will leave if it's not fixed. So I think that's one shift that needs to happen on behalf of companies when approaching this, because ultimately, if you don't get it right, you won't have a company to serve your clients in the first place. So what do you do? The first step, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, is to acknowledge the reality of the issue. So pretending workload is fine and it's normal and just to get on with it is probably the biggest trust killer that you can do. And I've seen this happen in front of me. You've had a structural change and now the resources are stretched, but you're now saying that this is an expectation now. Okay, we're just going to have to bite the bullet and run through it. No, this is your decision as a company that is impacting me and I am having to step up and I'm not being recognized for it. If things weren't bad enough already, you have just made it worse. Any kind of trust that they had, and there's a lot of companies who pride themselves on the relationship they have with their employees, the culture they have being a family one. We care, we have these missions, visions, and values. If it's not experienced from the employee's perspective, they will leave. And then often in your exit interviews is when you start to see that actually we weren't listening. They told us these signs at the beginning, but we just ignored them because we were thinking about our own concerns. So the first step is actually acknowledging that there is a situation. Hi, everyone. I know you've realized that X and Y people have left. And we know there's going to be, meaning that there's a lot of demand on you right now. And we just asking for your help in this situation. It's going to be temporary. We're looking at what to do about it. We're going through the exit interviews and understanding what went wrong. If there's anything that you have that would shed some light on it, that would be great as well. But we're going to be looking at over the next 3 months. So given some kind of deadline that you kind of want to replace them by, we're hoping to have other people who are coming back in. But it's taken that time because we want to make sure that the people we bring in are going to be working with the team, or are going to be able to expand it in a certain way. There will be opportunities. In the meantime, we're going to be doing X, Y, and Z, which I'll come to in a minute, things you can offer. But this is our plan of action to solve this problem that we recognize that you are experiencing. So acknowledging it is the first step. Transparency always brings psychological safety. Number 2 is reprioritizing as soon as possible. So if the team is smaller, the work can't stay the same for each the work can't stay the same. It has to change in some ways. And here's 3 ways to look at it. Either think about what needs to stop for this period, what needs to slow down. Maybe you can change the deadlines a little bit, work with your clients and explain to them what's happening. Or what needs to continue? What is mandatory that has to start? And I'll maybe even start with that. What are the mandatory tasks, projects that need to happen, and can we work backwards from there? The next step is resourcing that gap. Okay, so you've acknowledged there's a gap. You've prioritized, and I would usually advise to do that first before resourcing, because you don't want to resource something that actually doesn't need to be done. And you can do that through contractors. You can do that through temporary hires. You can do that through redistributing across departments. Maybe there's someone who has a skill set in another department who can step in the interim, and their workload is quite low in this season. Maybe you can look at automation, AI. Are there tasks that can be redefined or maybe removed in some kind of way to relieve some of the stress at this point? But ultimately, ignoring the gap leads to productivity collapse and further resignation. It was just going to get worse. And then the last stage in here is monitoring the burnout indicators, things like increased mistakes, absenteeism, presenteeism, declined morale. Have some kind of measure to be able to see this. Is it that you speak to them regularly? Is it that your coaching sessions are addressing it? Is it that you have mentorship? Is it that you're going to have check-ins on a weekly or daily basis? And the check-ins don't need to be like an hour long. They can literally just be 15 minutes. What are you struggling with? How can I help? What do you need? What is it that you're doing to recognize the signs that burnout is happening? So that's it from the company perspective. And if you're working in a company, if you're in HR, for example, and you have other ideas, it'd be great to see your comments in the ideas in the comments, because I think it's something, like I said, the stats are really high right now, and it's not just one company that's experiencing this. So if you have something that works for your company, put it in the comments and let's see how other companies can learn from that. The second one is from the manager. So now you're the person I always call these the MVPs. You're the ones who are pressured from above by meeting company deadlines and deliverables, but you're also pressured from below because you've got team dynamics, conflict resolution, team performance, all these things to be concerned about. Because the managers are often caught in the middle of this, right? So, and they can often end up being the bad guy. So you're someone who might have been at delivery stage and you've been promoted into manager, and now the skill set is completely different. You got to manage a team, which is a completely different way of working. But then now your concerns are going to be a lot bigger on how we deliver as a group. And so I would say for any company, by the way, going back to this, is protect your managers. Protect your managers. If you don't support your managers right, then the impact for the team means the whole team ends up failing. So protect your managers, protect the team from unrealistic expectations. So managers, please do that. Push back upwards with the evidence. So look at capacity, workload, deadlines, staffing gaps. Take notes of all of these in terms of statistics and go upwards to apply the pressure as opposed to going downwards to apply the pressure. Because what ends up happening is if you go downwards, they all end up leaving. You've already had 3 or 4 people leaving. Applying more pressure is not going to help. Look for help upwards. They're the ones with the resources, the ones where the decisions are being made. So try and put the pressure upwards before going downwards. The second one is making the workload visible. And I've been in a company where they did this. One of the most powerful tools is creating some kind of visible workload map. It might be on some kind of digital platform. It might be a physical thing, old school, having something on the wall. But what can you do which shows people the tasks, who owns the task, and what time is required to do it? Maybe what the deadline is for these, so that people can see what the workload is. If you see James has 12 things on his and Andrew has 4, maybe Alicia has 1 or 2, then you can redistribute some of these in a way, right? Ultimately, the leadership sees the reality, decisions, and gaps and is in charge of changing that. The next step you can do is prioritize ruthlessly. Ruthlessly. So instead of saying everything is urgent, which we often do, actually sit down and say what is critical, and defining critical is important. There's the amount of times I have been overstretched, and this isn't just me, I'm talking about the royal we, overstretched for something that didn't have to be a deadline for then. When you go past a deadline and you realize that actually it wasn't even a deadline, that's another way that stress is broken, trust is broken. So is it critical? Is it important? And what would happen if there is a delay? And genuinely thinking about this. Now, I've worked with a company when they actually had this conversation with us, asking us as the people who are delivering it, how is it going, etc., and then relaying what the leadership above them had been telling them. Right? Actually, our particular client is going to be, they're restructuring at the moment, so I think we can afford to push that deadline back a little bit. If we were able to push that 2 weeks, would we be able to get X, Y, and Z completed within that time and then bring the attention back to this? Things like that. Having communication is so key. And then protecting recovery time. Recovery time is so important when it comes to burnout. It's not necessarily just the tasks. It's not necessarily the time or even the energy. Recovery. Resilience is how fast you're able to bounce back. And everyone works differently. So it's important for you to know your individual employees when you do this. But can they bounce back? And the things that factor in are things like actual lunch breaks, so not working through the lunch, realistic deadlines. And I mentioned that before. You don't wait until Wednesday to give them a Friday deadline. And no unnecessary after hours work. Keep it down to a minimum and understand and recognize that if they're going to be taking time out of their own time to be able to work for you, acknowledge that. Feedback in some kind of way into their development meetings, into their reviews, performance reviews, etc. There's nothing more frustrating than feeling like you're giving everything to your work and getting nothing back. And then ultimately, burnout accelerates when this recovery disappears. If you don't have a recovery, burnout just gets faster. So now let's talk about if you're an employee. This is probably the hardest position because you have the least control. Ultimately, you're not the decision maker. You're not the person who has control over workload, etc. Unless you're a really small company, the chances are that you're going to be the person who's just doing the work, and you have expectations on the quality of the work that you're meant to be giving, the time of the turnaround. The only thing you might be able to give feedback on is how you might be able to do it better or more efficiently because you're the one doing it. But ultimately, you're on the receiving end a lot of the time. And so from you, things that I would say in terms of strategic moves you can do, number one is clarify the expectations. Ask questions like, given the reduced team, which priorities matter most? Which priority matters most? It is not your responsibility to prioritize. That's the manager and above. And this is something I had to learn the hard way. Asking questions like that puts the onus on them because otherwise they're going to expect you to prioritize even though you don't know the company's priorities. So give them the space for them to tell you those things. Um, Without clarity, employees try to do everything. And that's one of the things that ends up burning them out, right? So the second one is to document your workload. And this is key, not just for the employee, but for everyone within the company. Document your workload, keep track of the tasks, the hours you've spent on it, and the responsibilities that have been added on top of it, right? So, for example, what is your job description? You might have been working there for a few years, still within the same role, and not actually be aware anymore what your job description is. Go back to that and say, what am I doing that falls within my job description? What am I doing that falls outside of your job description? And there's a couple of reasons why I would suggest you do that. One is that when it becomes to performance reviews, you can show this list and give awareness, because often the people above you within the chain are so consumed with what their pressures are, they may not even be realizing. It might not be a malicious thing. They're just not aware of the work that you've had to take on. So now you're doing X, Y, and Z, which is outside of your job description. Raise it within your mentor meetings, your performance reviews, things like that. Let them know that this is what you've been able to do. One, so they can help you resource it. But then two, if you're looking to get a pay rise at some point, if you're looking to get a promotion at some point, then you can have actual evidence to present to them when that time comes. So yeah, and then the third one, and there's four of these, is to set realistic boundaries. So for example, I can take this on, but it means X and Y will be delayed. This is something I wish someone had told me a lot earlier. All right. Let them know beforehand. If you need this done as a priority, yes, that's fine. But right now I'm doing A, B, and C. Are you okay? Or what do you have in place if I'm not able to do this in this time? Are these okay to be started next week? Can I dedicate this week to this task? Which means that if anybody calls me about anything that isn't that, I may not be able to get around to it until next week, right? Realistic expectations, realistic boundaries on that, and get their sign off on it and say, yes, okay, cool. We're pulling you off this project. We're putting you on this project because it's critical. Just focus on that right now. And that can only happen if you raise the issue a lot of the time, especially if it's a company where they won't have the capacity to even realize that's what the pressure you're under. The last thing you can do as an employee is watch your burnout signals. So pay attention. Is there chronic exhaustion? Is there emotional detachment? Is there declining in performance? Like, be honest with yourself, reflect on it during the day, or maybe in the evenings when you're, having your dinner and you sometimes at bed, the day ruminates within your mind. If that's going to be happening, actually think to yourself, am I performing well? Am I chronically tired? Am I able to be my best self? If you're not, pay attention to that in terms of the growth or decline. You may need to escalate internally sometimes if this is like the final one, right? You may need to escalate it. If your manager, for example, isn't making the decision that are supporting you and it's just getting worse, what can you do? Is it that you raise it with HR? Is it that you raise it with the director? What are the things that you can do? Look at the policies of the company. What happens? What do they have in place, as a policy when your employees are overworked, right? Often they have some of these safeguarding policies. They have all these things in there that you probably would have gotten when you started many years ago in your employer's handbook that you just haven't looked back to. Have a look at what they have in place to support you. Maybe even look at what options you have in terms of your insurance. A lot of companies have well-being insurance companies that support you. You might be able to get therapy or extra training or CPD hours or something that's going to put you in a better standing to be able to deal with the workload that you have right now. Ultimately, the biggest truth is that the biggest risk in the situation is burnout contagion. Burnout contagion. And but what this is when one person leaves due to stress, then the workload spreads, and then that burns out the next person, and that leads to another resignation. So the workload spreads, and then another person burns out, right? So the cycle continues. That's the biggest risk. That's not just bad for the individual who's watching their team crumble but still having to be the rock, but not just bad for the manager who's watching their team crumble and not knowing how they're not being in a position to make decisions to be able to replace them, but also for the company who is seeing their teams crumble and not being able to meet deadlines, not being able to appease the clients, not being able to continue to receive more work because there's something structurally going wrong internally, which is causing an environment where no matter how well resourced, no matter how well the talent comes into the company, they all seem to burn out. So I hope this has been useful for you. If your team is suddenly doing 3 jobs at once, it's not a personal resilience problem ultimately. Right? It's often a capacity problem, and capacity problems require leadership solutions. And one thing I would say is if you're an individual, if you're a worker, if you're a manager and you're experiencing something like this and you need more support, there is a program called Ascend that I'm developing, which is the deadline is coming up soon, but there are different cohorts during the week. Just put Ascend in the comments and I'll send you a link where you can have a look at what that is. It's basically a 12-week container. We help you with your nervous system, giving you confidence to have some of these conversations. We look at your inner alignment. Is there purpose and fulfillment in your work? What about how to manage your time and energy as well? Because a lot of people focus on time but not energy, because we know that there are some tasks that you'll be able to do them all day, every day and not have a problem, but you speak to the wrong person for 20 minutes and it ruins your entire week. So we're going through all of that over 12 weeks to give you the tools to be able to go back into the workplace and be your best self. So if you're curious about that, put Ascend in the comments. But then also, as a company, we also work corporate. So if you're a company who is having struggle implementing some of the things that we've mentioned, then give us a shout. Just put company in the comments as well, and I'll respond to that. I hope this has been helpful, but keep the questions coming, and we'll see you next time on the Burnout Clinic.